Your mailbox is a community eyesore, and as of Monday, it sits on Larkspur Lane, whether you like it or not. That was Brenda Coyle, president of the Stonewater Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing at the end of my gravel drive in a hot pink blazer and white sneakers that had never touched a working pasture, telling me she had moved a federal mailbox off the public county road and onto a private interior street her association controlled. The property was mine. The frontage was mine. The little cluster box at the corner had served 4 ranch parcels since before her subdivision broke ground. And what Brenda did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 3 years she spent finding me, was that I had spent 26 years as a rural delivery and route examiner for the Postal Service. That I knew exactly what a recorded postal access easement was, and that the strip of ground she had just claimed as hers carried one older than her HOA by half a century. So when she told me my mailbox now belonged to her street, I want you to ask yourself what you would have done. Would you have argued? Would you have moved it back and waited for the next fine? Or would you have started a folder? I started a folder. My name is Walt Brennan. I am 61 years old, and for most of my working life, I drove and audited rural mail routes across 3 counties of high desert ranch country, the kind of place where a mailbox sits a quarter-mile from the house and the road to it matters more than the house does. I retired 6 years ago to the 40-acre parcel my wife Carol and I bought in 1988. A stretch of sage and juniper with a gravel drive running down to where the county road meets a little spur called Larkspur Lane. The work taught me one thing better than anything else taught it. A route lives or dies on access, and access lives or dies on what is recorded. I have stood at the back of a county recorder's office more mornings than I can count, pulling plats and easements to settle whether a box could legally sit where a carrier needed it to sit. A man can go his whole life never reading the deed to the ground he walks on. I read deeds for a living, and the habit never left me. Carol passed 4 years back. Cancer, quick and unfair, the way it usually is. I sat with her in the last weeks at the kitchen table she had picked out at an estate sale in 1991, and she made me promise 2 things. She made me promise I would keep the place, because it was the only piece of ground either of us had ever owned outright. And she made me promise I would not let it become a museum. She is buried under the lone ponderosa at the top of our drive, the one she planted as a seedling the first spring we owned the land. And on a clear morning, you can see the whole 40 acres from beside her marker. I kept the place because she asked me to. I kept it the way she wanted, which is lived in, with a dog and a garden gone half to weeds and a granddaughter doing homework at that same kitchen table. My granddaughter Tess lives with me now. Her mother, my daughter, works offshore on a survey vessel 3 weeks on and 1 week off. And when the schedule got impossible after Carol died, Tess came to stay with me and never really left. She is 16, sharp as a tack, and she has Carol's habit of noticing the thing that is wrong before anyone else does. She was the one who first noticed the survey stakes. She is the reason I scanned every page of every folder to a drive, because she set the drive up one rainy afternoon and told me a folder in a kitchen is 1 house fire away from gone. That is a 16-year-old thinking like a route examiner, and it would matter more than either of us guessed. I want to be plain about the land, because the land is the whole story. When Carol and I bought our 40 acres, the parcel came with frontage along the old county road and a recorded right of access to the mail cluster at the corner. That cluster of boxes had stood there since 1962, set on a strip of ground that the Postal Service held an access easement over, recorded at the county and tied to a federal route designation. 4 ranch families used it. The mail came down the county road, turned in at the corner, and that was that. None of us thought about it twice. A mailbox is a mailbox until somebody decides it is a flag they can plant. Stonewater Ridge went up on the old Hadley spread to the north of us, 240 homes on what used to be cattle ground, built out by a development company called Coyle and Marsh. The Coyle in that name was Brenda's husband, Dale. I did not know that yet, the day Brenda first drove her golf cart down to my gate. I only knew that a woman in a blazer was pointing at my mailbox, like it had personally insulted her. The first contact was almost polite. This was a Tuesday in early spring, 2 years after the subdivision filled in, and Brenda rolled up in a white golf cart with the HOA crest on the side and a clipboard balanced on her knee. I was out by the gate splicing a length of wire on the fence, and I heard the cart before I saw it. That little electric whine that does not belong in ranch country. She stopped on the far side of my gate and looked at me over a pair of sunglasses pushed up on her hair. She introduced herself as the association president and told me the mail cluster at the corner did not meet community aesthetic standards. "It's the first thing people see when they turn in," she said. "It looks like something from a county dump." I told her it was a federal box on a county road and had nothing to do with her community. She smiled the way people smile when they have already decided you are wrong, a tight little smile with no warmth behind it. And she said the corner was, in her words, functionally part of the Stonewater Ridge entrance, and that the association had a compelling interest in how it looked. I set down my pliers and looked at her for a moment. She was wearing white sneakers that had never seen a working pasture and a blazer the color of a road flare. And she was standing on gravel that had been there longer than her subdivision had a name. I said good day and went back to my fence work. She sat there a moment longer, the cart humming, then turned it around in my drive without asking and whined back up the lane. I thought that was the end of it. It was the first step on a staircase that took 3 years to climb. The first notice came in the mail a week later, which I always found funny, given what the fight was about. It was a formal letter on association letterhead, heavy cream paper with an embossed crest, citing me for an unapproved structure in a common interest area and assessing a fine of $50. I read it twice at the kitchen table while Tess did her homework across from me. The mail cluster was not a structure I had built. It was not in any common interest area, and the association had no jurisdiction over a single inch of my frontage. I did not call Brenda. I did not drive up to the clubhouse and argue. I took a clean manila folder out of the box I keep them in, wrote the date on the tab in pencil, and filed the notice inside. Then I sat down and typed a 1-page letter stating that the box was federal, that my access was recorded, and that I disputed the fine in full. And I drove it to the post office myself the next morning so it would carry a postmark. I kept a copy. Tess asked what it was about, and I told her a woman in a pink jacket thought she owned our mailbox. She asked if she did. I said no, and that was the whole truth of it for a while. That was incident 1. Carol used to tease me about my folders. She called it my paper religion. 26 years of route audits will do that to a man. When you spend your career documenting why a delivery was missed or a box was out of regulation, you learn that the person with the cleaner record wins every dispute that matters. And you learn it so deep, it becomes a reflex. I have seen a carrier keep his job over one dated photograph, and seen another lose a grievance, because he trusted his memory instead of his paper. Memory is a liar with good intentions. Paper does not change its story. So while Brenda escalated, I filed. Every notice, every photograph, every voicemail transcribed and dated. 2 copies of everything, one in the folder on the shelf in the hall, and one scanned to the drive Tess set up. I labeled the tabs in pencil so I could correct a date without scratching it out. I did not yet know I would need all of it. I only knew the habit, the same way I knew to walk a boundary before I trusted a map. The second incident came that summer, on a Thursday morning in July, with the heat already shimmering off the gravel. A man in a polo shirt and a lanyard showed up at the corner with a clipboard and a tape measure. Told me he was conducting a compliance inspection on behalf of the association, and started measuring the distance from the mail cluster to the edge of Larkspur Lane. I walked down from the house with Scout at my heel. I asked to see his credentials. He fished a laminated badge out of his shirt pocket that said Stonewater Ridge Code Enforcement, which is a thing that does not exist, because an HOA cannot enforce code. It enforces its own bylaws against its own members on its own common property, and I was neither a member nor on its property. "You'll want to step back, sir," he said. "This is an official measurement." I told him there was nothing official about it, that he was standing on a recorded postal easement, and that I would appreciate it if he did not touch the box. He photographed it anyway, crouching to get the base of the cluster in frame. I took out my own phone and photographed him photographing it, and I read the easement reference number aloud while I did it so it would be on my recording. He stood up, looked at me a second, and said the association would be in touch. Then he got in a hatchback with a magnetic sign on the door and drove off. Folder, that was incident 2, and it was the first time I felt the thing in my chest go tight and hot, the way it does when somebody steps where they have no right to step. I did not raise my voice. Carol always said my temper lived in my hands, in how hard I gripped a wrench, never in my mouth. I gripped the gate rail until the cold metal bit into my palm and let it pass. Tess found me there a few minutes later and asked if I was all right. I told her I was filing. By the fall, the notices were coming monthly, each one heavier than the last. A $50 fine became $100. $100 became $250 for what they called continued noncompliance. I disputed each one in writing, kept each copy, drove each dispute to the post office for the postmark, and watched the tally climb in the corner of the folder tab where I kept a running count. 6 notices by the first winter. I did not lose a night of sleep over a single one of them, because I knew a fine you have disputed in writing, and that the levying body has no jurisdiction to impose is not a debt. It is a piece of paper. The trick is keeping the paper. Then Tess noticed the stakes. It was a Saturday in November, cold and bright, the kind of morning where the frost holds on the sage until almost noon. Tess came in from walking the dog, an old blue heeler named Scout, who had been Carol's, stamping the cold off her boots, and told me there were little orange flags planted along the corner where the mail cluster stood. I drove down with her, Scout in the bed of the truck with his nose into the wind. Somebody had set survey stakes in a neat line that ran right through the easement strip, flagging it as if it were part of Larkspur Lane. The flags were the bright plastic kind that snap in the wind, a dozen of them, marching across ground that had never been anything but a mail corner. I did not touch them. I photographed everyone against a fixed reference, the corner of the cluster and the old fence post, so the line could be measured later. Then I went home, pulled the recorded easement from my files, and laid it out on the kitchen table next to my own deed map with a ruler. The numbers did not match what the stakes claimed by a good 12 feet. Somebody was trying to redraw a boundary on the ground that the paper would never support. Tess watched me work the ruler across the map and asked why anyone would care about 12 feet of dirt at a mailbox. I did not have an answer for her yet. Folder, and a question I could not shake for the rest of that winter. Why would an HOA spend real money on a licensed survey of a mail corner it claimed was just an eyesore? I found out the answer the following spring, and it changed the shape of everything. There was a public notice tacked to the corkboard at the feed store, half hidden behind a flyer for a 4-H auction, the kind nobody reads, announcing a proposed rezoning and road dedication hearing for a parcel adjacent to Stonewater Ridge. I read it because reading notices is another habit the Postal Service beat into me. I read it twice, standing there in my work coat with a sack of fence staples under my arm. And then I read it a third time. The parcel in question included the corner. The applicant was Coyle and Marsh Development. The plan was to dedicate a widened Larkspur Lane as a through road connecting the subdivision to the county road, which would let Coyle and Marsh open a second phase of 200 more homes on the back acreage they had been quietly buying up for years. And the corner, my corner, with its inconvenient little federal mail cluster sitting on a 50-year-old easement, was right in the throat of the new road. That was the moment the blazer and the clipboard and the fake code officer all clicked into a single picture. I stood in the feed store and felt the whole thing rearrange itself. This was never about aesthetics. Brenda's husband needed that strip of ground clean and unencumbered, and the mail cluster was the encumbrance. She had been trying to bully a federal easement off the map so her husband's road could go through, and she had been dressing it up as community standards the whole time. I want to tell you, I felt triumphant when I figured it out. I did not. I felt the cold, settled focus you feel when a job finally comes into view after months of guessing. I had been filing paper against a vain woman. Now I understood I was filing paper against a development deal worth more money than I would see in 3 lifetimes, and that the vain woman was the front for it, the loud part of a quiet machine. That is a different fight. A different fight needs a deeper folder, and it needs a second set of eyes that knows the law better than you do. So I did 2 things. I drove to the county recorder the next morning and pulled the full chain of title on the easement strip, every conveyance back to the original grant. And I called an old colleague named Ray Okafor, a retired postal real estate specialist who had handled easement and lease matters for the district for 30 years. If there was a man alive who understood exactly what that recorded strip was worth and how it could be defended, it was Ray. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is rare, and then he told me to send him everything I had. I did that afternoon. 2 copies, the way Carol taught me, even though Ray only needed 1. The chain of title is where the story turns. So let me lay it out plainly. The mail cluster sat on a strip that had been carved off the old Hadley Ranch in 1962 and granted to the Postal Service as a recorded access easement in perpetuity for the purpose of mail delivery to the 4 ranch parcels. The underlying fee, the actual ownership of the dirt under the easement, had stayed with the Hadley estate and then passed through a tangle of probate to a holding entity that had gone dormant decades ago. Coyle and Marsh, in buying up the old Hadley ground for their second phase, had assumed they were buying that strip too. The trouble was that the dormant entity still technically held the fee, and it had never been properly conveyed in the development purchase. The strip was an orphan. Whoever owned that fee owned the dirt under the road Dale Coyle needed to build, and the postal easement riding on top of it could not be extinguished by an HOA, a developer, or a county road dedication because it was a federal property interest. Ray confirmed all of it in writing. Then he told me something that made me sit down at the kitchen table for a long, quiet minute. The dormant holding entity was in default on years of back taxes, and the fee interest in that strip was scheduled to be sold at the county tax auction in 90 days. I could buy the ground under their road. I did not tell anyone except Ray and Tess. The escalations kept coming through that spring, and now I understood them as a clock running down toward the hearing. In April, a crew of contractors showed up at the corner with a flatbed and a small excavator and began, without any permit posted anywhere, to dig out the base of the mail cluster as if to relocate it. I heard the equipment from the house and walked down with my phone already recording. Scout, pacing beside me. The foreman was a decent enough man caught in a bad job. He told me he had orders from the association to move the boxes to a new location on Larkspur Lane. I told him the boxes sat on a federal easement, that disturbing a federal postal installation was a federal matter and not an HOA matter. And I read him the easement reference number off the recorded document I had brought, folded in my shirt pocket. "I just go where they send me," he said. But he had stopped the machine, and I could see him doing the math on whose name was on the work order. He called somebody. 20 minutes later, Brenda's white SUV came down the lane too fast, throwing gravel, the vanity plate reading HOAPREZ. And she got out in the same hot pink blazer and a fresh manicure, and told the foreman to keep digging. "This corner is functionally part of our community entrance," she said, loud enough for the contractors to hear, planting herself between me and the machine. "And Mr. Brennan does not get to hold the whole neighborhood hostage with his eyesore. Pour the new pad. I will sign for it." I did not argue with her. There was nothing to argue. I stepped a little to the side so my phone had a clean line on her and the excavator both. And I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and reported an unpermitted excavation disturbing a federal postal installation, reading out the location while she was still talking. A deputy named Marcus Reyes came out within the hour. He was young, careful, and visibly uncomfortable being in the middle of it. He told me honestly that the association had filed complaints about me too, and that he had to take those seriously as well. That a filed complaint gets acted on, regardless of who is right, and that this was the part of the job nobody liked. Then he said the thing that turned my pile of paper into a plan. He told me that if I wanted this to stop for good, I needed to build a documented pattern. That one incident was a he said, she said, but a stack of dated, photographed, recorded incidents was a case, and that the number that tended to get the county attorney's attention was somewhere north of a dozen well-documented events. I had 7. He checked for a posted permit, found none, and told the contractors to stop work until the county could confirm one, which it never did. So they loaded the excavator back onto the flatbed and left. Brenda left with them, telling me over her shoulder that this was not over. The mail cluster stayed exactly where it was. Incident 8, filed that night. Scout asleep under the table while Tess scanned the photos and the foreman's face into the drive. The excavation was the moment Brenda crossed a line she could not uncross, though she did not feel it yet. Disturbing a federal easement is not an aesthetics dispute. I had it on video, with her on camera ordering the crew to continue after being told what the strip was. I sent the file to Ray and to a second drive. Then I went quiet and waited for the auction, the way you wait out a storm you have already prepared for. The escalations in those 90 days came faster, because the road dedication hearing was coming and the corner was still in the way. In May, the association sent a certified letter claiming I owed $4,200 in accumulated fines and threatening a lien on my property. I signed for it at the post office, read it in the truck, and felt nothing but a kind of grim satisfaction, because a threatened lien is a written admission of intent that a court can read. I disputed it in writing, noted that no valid lien can attach for fines an association has no jurisdiction to levy, and filed it with the others. Incident 9. In June, a man I did not recognize began parking a gray sedan at the end of Larkspur Lane in the late afternoon, sitting there with the engine running, photographing my house. Tess told me about it before I saw it myself. She had gotten off the school bus and noticed him raise a phone toward her as she walked up the drive. And she came in the house with her voice tight in a way I did not like at all. That was the only time in 3 years my hands shook, and they shook at the kitchen sink where she could not see them. I did not walk down there and confront him. Everything in me wanted to. Instead, I waited until the next afternoon, watched from the porch with Carol's old binoculars, got his plate and called Deputy Reyes directly. I reported it as harassment and possible surveillance of a minor, and I wrote down the report number. Incident 10. The man stopped coming after the deputy ran his plate, which traced back to a contractor on the Coyle and Marsh payroll. I told Tess she did not have to walk the last stretch of the drive alone anymore, that I would meet the bus, and for the rest of that month I did. Standing at the gate at 3:15 with Scout, every single day. Reyes came by himself after that, off the clock, in his own truck and a flannel shirt instead of the uniform. He stood in my kitchen and told me quietly that the pattern was building into something the county attorney would have to look at, and that I was close. He did not tell me what to do. He turned his coffee cup in his hands and said he had been a deputy in this county for 11 years and had watched more than one developer treat the place like a thing to be subdivided and sold, and that it was not his job to have an opinion about that, but that a clean documented file had a way of speaking for itself. He just confirmed the number was getting where it needed to be. 11 incidents. Then Brenda gave me the 12th herself, in early July, 2 weeks before the tax auction and 3 weeks before the road hearing. Brenda called a special meeting of the association in the clubhouse and, in front of 40 homeowners, announced that the Brennan parcel was a blight on the community, that my mail cluster would be removed by court order, and that anyone who sympathized with me was free to find another neighborhood. I was not there. I heard it from a woman who was. One of the homeowners, a retired schoolteacher named Joan Pruitt, who lived on the edge of the subdivision nearest my line, recorded the whole speech on her phone because something about the way Brenda said it did not sit right with her. She drove down my gravel in a sensible sedan that evening, knocked on my door, introduced herself, and played me the recording right there on the porch. Brenda's voice came out of the little speaker clear and proud, calling my home a blight and promising to remove a federal installation by an authority she did not have. I taught civics for 30 years, Joan said, putting the phone back in her purse. I know an empty threat dressed up as an order when I hear one. I did not sign up for this when I bought my house. She offered to swear to what she had heard and to hand over the recording if it ever came to that. I thanked her and filed her statement and a copy of the audio that same night. Incident 12, and the first ally to walk down my drive of her own free will. Scout liked her immediately, which Carol always said was the only character reference that mattered. The tax auction came on a Tuesday morning at the county building, in a fluorescent-lit room with folding chairs and a coffee urn that had given up sometime around dawn. I wore a clean shirt and Carol's father's watch. Estelle, Ray had walked me through exactly how it worked over the phone the night before, twice until I could have recited it. And he had confirmed the fee interest in the easement strip would be offered to satisfy the back taxes owed by the dormant entity. The minimum bid was the tax debt, a little under $9,000. I had it. Carol and I had always kept a cushion in a savings account we never touched, money put aside a little at a time across 30 years. And I could not think of a better use for it than buying the dirt under the road that a vain woman's husband wanted to take. There were 2 other bidders in the room for that lot. A man in a quilted vest who looked like he flipped tax parcels for a living and a younger fellow on his phone, and neither of them seemed to understand what the strip actually was or why it might matter. To them it was a sliver of unbuildable ground at a mailbox. The clerk read the lot number and the opening figure. The man in the vest bid. I bid. The younger one bid once and dropped out. The man in the vest and I went back and forth in $500 steps while the clerk's pen tapped the table, and the bidding went to $11,400 before the vest shook his head and sat back. I won it. My heart was going like a hammer, but my hand was steady when I signed. The clerk handed me a receipt and told me the deed would record within the week. I drove home owning the ground under Larkspur Lane's planned extension, with a 50-year-old federal postal easement still riding on top of it, and not a soul at Coyle and Marsh knew it yet. I told Tess that night. She asked me if we had won. I told her not yet, that paper does not win anything until you put it in front of the right person at the right moment, and that the right moment was coming in 2 weeks at the road hearing. She asked if she could come. I said yes. The road dedication hearing was held in the county commission chambers on a Thursday evening, and the room was full. Coyle and Marsh had brought a lawyer and an engineer and a glossy rendering of the second phase on an easel. Dale Coyle was there, a heavy-set man in a sport coat who I recognized now as the quiet presence behind every escalation. Brenda sat in the front row in her hot pink blazer, with the look of a woman attending her own coronation. The engineer presented the plan for widening Larkspur Lane into a through road, dedicating it to the county and opening the back acreage to development. The commission chair asked whether the applicant had clear title to the full roadbed. The lawyer said yes, that all the underlying parcels were controlled by the applicant. And that was the moment I had been filing toward for 3 years. I had signed up to speak during public comment. When the chair called my name, I walked to the podium with a single folder. I did not raise my voice. I have watched 100 men lose a point by getting loud, and I was not going to be the 101st. I said my name, and that I owned the parcel at the corner. Then I said that the applicant did not in fact control the full roadbed, because the fee interest in the strip under the proposed extension had been sold at the county tax auction 2 weeks earlier, and that I held the recorded deed. I laid the deed on the rail in front of the commission. Then I said that regardless of who owned the fee, the strip carried a recorded federal postal access easement dating to 1962, that the easement could not be extinguished by a road dedication, and that any road built across it would require relocating a federal installation through the Postal Service, not through an HOA vote. I laid the recorded easement next to the deed. The room was very quiet. I let it stay quiet. I had learned a long time ago that a document does its best work in silence, that the worst thing you can do at the moment a thing lands is to keep talking over it. So I stood there with my hand flat on the 2 pages and said nothing, and let 40 people read the room for themselves. The commission chair asked the developer's lawyer if he was aware of the easement. The lawyer looked at Dale Coyle. Dale Coyle looked at Brenda. And Brenda, who had spent 3 years insisting the corner was functionally part of her jurisdiction, said the only thing she could think to say, which was that the box was an eyesore. Nobody in the room laughed, but something in the air shifted, the way it shifts when 40 people realize at the same moment that the loud one has been wrong the whole time. The county council asked to examine the documents. He read the easement reference, checked it against the county's own recording index on a laptop, and confirmed for the chamber that the easement was valid, recorded, and federal, and that the deed to the underlying fee was now in my name. He said the road as proposed could not be dedicated. Here is the contrast I want you to hold. In 3 years, Brenda Coyle's association had levied $4,200 in fines against me and collected exactly 0 of them, because everyone was disputed in writing and everyone was void. In 2 weeks, I had spent $11,400 and bought the ground their entire second phase depended on. The easement she had spent 3 years trying to bully off the map had been recorded 63 years before she ever printed a notice. She had been fighting a piece of paper older than she was, and she never once read it. The consequence fell exactly where her own actions had aimed it. The second phase of Stonewater Ridge could not proceed without that road, and the road could not cross my strip without my consent, and a federal relocation process I had no reason on earth to grant. Coyle and Marsh had already borrowed against the back acreage on the assumption the road was a formality. When the road died, the loan came due against ground they could not develop. Within a few months, the second phase collapsed, the partnership filed for reorganization, and two of their lenders began circling the rest of the company. The county opened an inquiry into the unpermitted excavation and the surveillance of a miner, both of which were now sitting in Deputy Reyes's documented file with my photographs, the plate trace, and Jones' recording attached. All of it dated, all of it cross-referenced. Exactly the kind of clean file he had told me would speak for itself. Brenda resigned the association presidency before the homeowners could vote her out, which they were preparing to do. The fines she had spent 3 years stacking against me were formally voided in a single line of a county council's letter. The corner stayed exactly where it had stood since 1962. I never moved my mailbox an inch. A week after the hearing, Joan Pruitt organized a few of the Stonewater Ridge homeowners to repaint the community sign and quietly amend the bylaws so no future president could levy a fine without a recorded jurisdictional basis. She brought me a pie. Tess thought that was the funniest part of the whole thing, that 3 years of fines ended with a peach pie on our porch. Scout ate a corner of it when nobody was looking. The evening after it was all done, Tess and I walked down to the corner at golden hour, the sage going copper in the low light and the long shadows of the fence posts reaching across the gravel. We stood at the mail cluster that had started it all, its paint faded, its little doors as dented as they had been the day I retired. She asked me if Grandma would have liked how it ended. I thought about it. I told her Carol would have liked that I never raised my voice and never moved the box, that she always said being right was easy and staying calm about it was the hard part. We walked back up the drive past the ponderosa where Carol is buried, the tree taller now than the day she planted it, and the orange survey flags were long gone, and the only thing planted in that ground was what had always been planted there. I latched the gate the way I latch it every night. Scout went up the steps ahead of us, slow on his old hips. The mail came the next morning the way it had come for 63 years, down the county road, in at the corner, and that was that. So here is the lesson, plain as I can make it, because you came this far and you have earned it. If somebody with a clipboard tells you a piece of your property is functionally theirs, do not argue and do not move it. Pull your deed. Read it against the ground with a tape measure. Go to the county recorder and pull the full chain of title, including every easement, because the oldest recorded interest almost always wins, and most people never bother to look. Keep a folder. Date every notice, photograph every incident, scan a second copy somewhere safe, and dispute every improper fine in writing so nothing they levy can ever quietly become a lien. Talk to your neighbors, because the one who records the speech may be the ally you did not know you had. And if you ever find out that the dirt under their plan is for sale, remember that the cleanest way to stop a road is to own the ground it has to cross. Authority that never checks the paper is not authority. It is a costume. The deed is the thing. If you have a story like this, a fence, a gate, a boundary, a box somebody tried to take, put it in the comments. Because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who needed to hear they are not crazy. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there are plenty more where this came from. Next time, I will tell you about the woman who tried to charge a rancher for the rainwater that fell on his own land, and what happened when he pulled the water decree his great-grandfather filed in 1904. Until then, keep your folder close and your fences true.